Hello everyone, welcome to Michigan Man MTG, and we're here with our first look at Marvel Spider-Man. So today we got the 5 welcome decks for Marvel Spider-Man, and we have over 50 cards to talk about today from the set, so we got a lot of cards to dive into. Now the interesting thing about the welcome decks is they actually have some Commander legal cards in them, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but I'm not going to talk about those today because they're not actually going to be standard legal outside of playing them in a welcome deck. Alright, but before we dive in, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Marvel Spider-Man season and beyond. Alright, so let's get into today's previews. Alright, so our first card, we got Peter Parker. For 1 and a white mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human scientist hero, and is a 0/1, and when Peter Parker enters the battlefield, you get to create a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. So good value on Peter Parker. You get 2 creatures for 2 mana, and then for 1, a green, a white, and a blue mana, you can transform Peter Parker, and you can activate only as a sorcery, and when you do, you get the Amazing Spider-Man. Okay, for those 4 mana, legendary creature, that's a spider human hero with vigilance and reach, and is a 4/4. In each legendary spell you cast that's 1 or more colors has web slinging, which is a new ability in the set or new mechanic in the set. For a blue, white, and a green mana, you can play a card that has higher mana value, and you may cast a spell for its web-slinging cost if you also return a tapped creature you control to its owner's hand. So interesting ability on Spider-Man there, that this web-slinging, we're going to see a couple cards that have web-slinging on it as we do the previews. So I think this is going to be an interesting ability in Standard, and I'm thinking about, hey, I've got a station that I need to, go ahead and put mana into or power into, or I've got a vehicle that I need to crew. So I think in those situations, this could be a very powerful ability in Standard where you're tapping something, it comes back to your hand when you cast that card. That's legendary. And is Peter Parker Standard playable? Absolutely. I think people will try to build around Peter Parker in these banned colors, and we'll see where that deck goes. Next, we've got Origin of Spider-Man. For 1 and a white mana, you get a Saga. And on Chapter 1, you get to create a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. So right there, you get good value. And then on Chapter 2, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It becomes a legendary spider hero in addition to its other types. So you get a +1/+1 counter. And then on Chapter 3, target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. So a very powerful Saga here that I feel will definitely see play in Standard. Next, we've got Spider-Ham, Peter Parker. For 1 and a green mana, you get a legendary creature that's a spider boar hero and is a 2/2. And when Spider-Ham enters the battlefield, you get to create a food token. So, 2/2 for 2 is good, kind of on par value for it, but getting to create the food token definitely is a help. And it's also has the ability of animal mayhem. Other spiders, boars, bats, bears, birds, cats, dogs, frogs, jackals, lizards, mice, otters, rabbits, raccoons, rats, squirrels, turtles, and wolves you control get +1/+1. So basically, non-traditional creature types, for the most part, those are going to get +1/+1 when you have Spider-Ham in play. So I think that Anthem ability there that you've got on Spider-Ham, in the right deck, that can make it very Standard playable. Next, we've got Spider-Man 2099. For a blue and a red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a spider hero human and is a 2/3, and it has From the Future. You can't cast Spider-Man 2099 during your first, second, or third turn of the game. Spider-Man here has double strike and vigilance, so very powerful abilities. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you've played a land or cast a spell this turn from anywhere other than your hand, Spider-Man 2099 deals damage equal to its power to any target. So if are playing the typical kind of red stuff where you get to exile some cards and rather than draw them, and then you can play them on this turn or the next turn, then I think Spider-Man has a home in that style of deck. If we've got that exile some cards and then play them ability on cards that we're going to see in standard. So potentially has a place in the format. Next, we've got our lower rarity cards from the welcome decks. And we've got a very important thing to talk about. So first thing we want to talk about is Spider-Man Web Slinger. And for 3 mana, legendary creature that's a spider human hero, 3/3 with web slinging. Okay, so for 1 mana you can bring this into play. So very powerful in that from that standpoint. But also it's a common. Before this Spider-Man set, there was a total of 1 common legendary creature. And that was in red, and it was in, I believe, Modern Horizons 3. But outside of that, we'd never seen this. So Spider-Man is going to, have a definite impact on the Commander format or Commander variants, where maybe you're using only commons, the kind of the popper common now has creatures that could be commanders for those type of decks. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out based on the cards we're seeing in Marvel's Spider-Man. All right, our next card is Aunt May for a white mana. You legendary creature, human citizen, 0/2. Whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield, you gain a life. So typical, Soul Warden effect. If it's a spider, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So we get to boost our spider cards. So if there is a quote-unquote Spider-Man deck or some variation of that, then Aunt May makes a lot of sense in that deck because you're going to be able to give all of your spider cards a +1/+1 counter, and modifying things is something that we'll talk about as we move throughout the cards from today. Next, we've got Starling Aerial Ally for 5 mana, legendary creature, human hero, 3/4, flying, and whenever Starling enters the battlefield, another target creature you control gains flying until end of turn. Limited playable, won't see anything in standard. Okay, now we've got our first villain cards from the set. So we've got heroes and villains as 2 new subtypes from the set. So the first is Beetle Legacy Criminal for 4 mana. You get, again, legendary creature, human, rogue, villain. And a lot of them are going to be rogues and villains together, which is some interesting pairings of creature types. 3/3 with flying, and for 1 and a blue mana, you can exile this from your graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. Limited card, probably won't see play outside of that. Doc Ock, Sinister Scientist for 4 and a blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human scientist villain, 4/5. And as long as there are 8 or more cards in your graveyard, Doc Ock has base power and toughness of 8/8. And as long as you control another villain, Doc Ock has hexproof. So this is also a common, but it's probably not going to be in some kind of mill style deck to get 8 cards in your graveyard, making Doc Ock an 8/8. And if there is a villain deck, then maybe we see this in that, because even though a 4/5 for 5 mana is kind of on the low end of playable, because you can make it an 8/8, because you can give it hexproof, okay, I think those are good enough reasons to potentially consider this as a standard card. All right, next we've got another Spider-Man, Spider Bite, Web Warden for 2 and a blue mana. You legendary creature that's a spider avatar hero and is a 2/2. When Spider Bite enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hands. This is very reminiscent of Jill from the Final Fantasy set, kind of the same text on the card. But we do have the Esper Bounce deck, and because of that, this possibly has a shot at seeing some play in there. Next, we've got Scorpion, Seething Striker for 3 and a black mana. You get a legendary creature that's a Scorpion human villain. 3/3 with Death Touch. And at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, target creature you control connive. So connive is a returning mechanic to the Marvel Spider-Man set, and when you connive, you're drawing a card, and then you discard a card. If you discard a non-land card, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So connive, was a solid ability in the past on creatures, or mechanic on creatures, and I think it's going to have something to say in the standard format moving forward because of that. Now, is Scorpion Seething Striker good enough for standard? Probably not, but there's a possibility in the right deck. Again, if you have a villain deck, then maybe this fits in there. Next, we've got Spider-Man Noir. For 5 mana, you get a legendary creature that's a spider human hero, 4/4 with menace. And whenever a creature you control attacks alone, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then you surveil X, where X is the number of counters on it. So nice ability here, but again, I think we've got better stuff to do in standard for 5 mana in black, that cards that aren't even seeing play that are better than this. So I think this is a limited card that'll be good in limited. Next, we've got Tombstone, Career Criminal for 2 and a black mana. You legendary creature, human villain, 2/2. And when Tombstone enters the battlefield, return target villain card from your graveyard to your hand. So nice, limited piece there. Hey, I'm going to pull a villain back to my hand from my graveyard that died in a previous turn or got discarded. And then villain spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So if we do have a villain deck in standard, Tombstone is going to be a key part of that because of that mana reduction on Tombstone. All right, next we've got Venom, Evil Unleashed for 4 and a black mana. You legendary creature that's a symbiote villain, 4/5 with Death Touch. And for 2 and a black mana, exile this card from your graveyard. If you do, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains Death Touch until end of turn, and you only activate that as a sorcery. Again, good limited card, but probably won't see play outside of that. Next, we've got Shocker, Unshakable for 6 total mana in red. You legendary creature that's a human rogue villain, 5/5. During your turn, it gets first strike. And then it also has Vibro Shock Gauntlets. When Shocker enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to that creature's controller. So nice enter the battlefield trigger on it. Is it standard playable? Probably not at 6 mana, but probably a good card in limited. All right, next we've got Stegron, the Dinosaur Man, for 4 and a red mana. You legendary creature that's a dinosaur villain, 5/4 with menace, and it also has Dinosaur Formula for 1 and a red mana. You can discard this card, and until end of turn, target creature you control gets +3/+1 and becomes a dinosaur in addition to its other types. So again, interesting legendary creature, but limited playable only. Next, we've got Spider-Gwen, Free Spirit for 2 and a red mana. You get a legendary creature, again, Spider Human Hero, 2/3 with reach. And whenever Spider-Gwen becomes tapped, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So right now in the VV deck in Standard, we have this desire to draw and discard cards to grow creatures that are on the battlefield from that ability, and I think Spider-Gwen potentially has a place in that deck as a couple copies. Next, we've got our green legendary creatures, and the first is Spider-Man, Brooklyn Visionary, for 4 and a green mana. Legendary creature, again, Spider-Human Hero, 4/3 with web slinging of 2 and a green mana. And again, you may cast the spell for 2 and a green mana if you also return a tapped creature you control to its owner's hand. And when Spider-Man enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So if you can cast this for its web slinging cost, I think it's a good card. Even though it's a common, I think it's actually a pretty good card. Definitely very limited playable, and if I saw this, I'd want it. Because you're going to get a land when Spider-Man comes into play, and you have that cost reduction of doing it for only 3 mana. So 3 mana, get a 4/3. That's a pretty good card in limited. Probably not going to see standard play, but we do have our landfall decks in standard, and maybe this is a card that you might want a copy of in that kind of deck. Next, we've got Spider-Rex Daring Dino for 6 mana. Legendary Spider Dinosaur Hero. 6/6, reach, trample, ward 2. Very limited playable, and it'll be a good card in limited. Alright, and our last legendary creature from the welcome decks is Spider Piloted by Penny. For 3, a white and a blue mana, you get a legendary artifact creature, Spider Hero, 4/4, with Vigilance. And when Spider enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And then whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. And a modified creature is any creature that's been equipped, has an aura, eye control on it, or counters on it. And right now in standard, there's a lot of different ways to modify creatures. So I think this could potentially be the one card we're seeing today that has the greatest chance to see standard play in some kind of Azorius build. And if we do, then the modified ability to draw those extra cards is really going to be what makes the standard playable. Definitely a card I would want in limited. All right, so those are all the legendary creatures that we saw from the day, and we got a lot of them. So let's move on then to our lower rarity cards that we saw from the day that were non-legendary. First up is Daily Bugle Reporter for 4 mana, Human Citizen, 2/3, and when this creature enters the battlefield, you get to choose 1 puff piece, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 2 creatures, or Investigative Journalism, return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, good limited card because getting those +1 counters, that modified ability, but probably doesn't see any play outside of that. Next, we've got Selfless Police Captain for 2 mana, Human Detective, 1/1. And the detective probably doesn't matter, but we do have from the last Ravnica set, we do have detectives, so possibly there's some synergy there, but we'll have to see. Now, when it comes into play, this creature gets a +1/+1 counter put on it. Again, that +1/+1 counter, modified creature strategy. And when this creature leaves the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So, interesting card there. Probably nothing more than a limited card, but definitely interesting. All right, next we've got Spectacular Tactics. For 1 and a white mana, you get an instant, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and it gains hexproof until end of turn, or you get to destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Now, we've seen a card similar to this. Yeah, we've had one in standard for 3+ years with Destroy Evil, but it's the toughness of the creature that matters. And we got Exorcist or Exercise from one of our recent sets where it's based on power like this one is, but you could also destroy an artifact or an enchantment. But if we need something that's flexible that can kill a high-powered creature, but also potentially give something hexproof, then maybe this has an outside chance of seeing some standard play. Certainly good and limited. Next, we've got Twip for a white mana. You get an instant, target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. If it's a spider, you gain 2 life. Limited playable, probably not going to see it outside of that. Next, we've got Web Up for 3 mana. Okay, this is our Banishing Light from the set. And when this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. Okay, definitely a playable card. But we also have Banishing Light too. So kind of what would you like to put in your deck? Next, we've got Wild Pack Squad For 3 mana, you get a Human Mercenary. 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target creature gains first strike and vigilance until end of turn. Good limited card. Probably won't see any standard play. Next, we've got Doc Ock's Henchman for 2 and a blue mana. Human villain, 2/1 with flash. The flash makes this card a little bit interesting, and whenever this creature attacks, it connives. So that ability on this, now probably this is not going to see standard play, but in limited, it probably will be a good card. Next, we've got Oscorp Research Team for 4 mana, Human Scientist 1/5, and for 7 mana you can draw 2 cards. Limited playable at best. Next, we've got Unstable Experiment for 1 and a blue mana. You get an instant. Target player draws a card, then up to 1 target creature you control connives. So I like this because you're going to, in essence, draw 2 cards and discard a card. But you also have the upside of getting a +1/+1 counter. So this is, I think, a playable draw effect in standard. Next, we've got Whoosh for 1 and a blue mana. You get an instant with kicker of 1 and a blue, and you can return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and if the spell was kicked, you get to draw a card. So 4 mana, draw a card, puts something of value back in your owner's hand, its owner's hands. And the key thing here is on this one, if you look at it, it's return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. It doesn't say that you have to target your opponent's stuff. You can target your own things with this, which makes it a little bit more playable. So in limited, definitely a card I would consider, because being able to protect your stuff by bouncing it back to your hand, is a solid ability. Next, we've got Merciless Enforcers for 1 and a black mana, Human Mercenary Villain, 2/1 with lifelink. And for 4 mana, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So limited playable, probably won't see anything outside of that. Next, we've got Risky Research for 2 and a black mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to surveil 2, then draw 2 cards, and lose 2 life. Again, limited playable black draw spell. Probably doesn't see play outside of that. Next, we've got some removal cards in black, and the first is Scorpion Sting for 2 mana. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. Probably just a limited playable card. Next, we've got Venom's Hunger for 5 mana, and this spell costs 2 less to cast if you control a villain. So 3 mana, destroy target creature, you gain 2 life. Probably nothing more than limited playable. Next, we go to red, and we've got Angry Rabble for 1 and a red mana. You get a Human Citizen. That's a 2/2 with trample. And whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. And for 6 mana, you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature, activate only as a sorcery. Definitely a limited playable card. The ability to have trample on a 2/2 is very good. And that potential for doing some damage to your opponent if you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, I think makes it a solid card in limited. Again, we're probably not going to see it in standard. Next, we've got Electro's Bolt for 2 and a red mana. You get a sorcery. Electro's Bolt deals 4 damage to target creature, and it has Mayhem. And what Mayhem means is you can cast this card from your graveyard for 1 and a red mana. If you discard it at this turn, timing rules still apply. So basically, if you've got this in a deck where you're discarding cards naturally, the VV Izzet deck is a good example of this, then I feel like this has an outside chance of maybe seeing some sideboard play, because you can draw a card, discard a card, you discard this, you play it for 2 mana, you do 4 damage to a creature, which, for 2 mana, 4 damage, is kind of on par for that. But we've got really better things in standard that do this. So limited playable, probably nothing beyond that. Next, we've got Masked Meower for a red mana. You get a Spider Cat Hero. That's a 1/1 with haste, and you can discard a card, sacrifice this creature to draw a card. So interesting ability on it, but again, probably not going to see play beyond limited. Next, we've got Romantic Rendezvous. For 2 mana, you get a sorcery, discard a card, then draw 2 cards. Okay, so we've seen this card many times over the last 10 to 15 years. This is just the latest version of this in red. Next, we've got Shock. Okay, Shock is back in Standard. It was back in Standard anyways because it was reprinted last year. But it does 2 damage to any target. Always a good removal spell in red. Next, we've got Spider Islanders for 4 mana. Spider Horror Citizen. That's a 4/3 with Mayhem. And again, if you're able to discard this and then cast it for 2 mana, that's pretty good. So probably not standard playable, but in limited, if you're doing the draw discard thing in your limited deck, I think it's a really good card for that. Next, we've got Taxi Driver for 2 mana. Okay, our last red card of the day. He's a human pilot and a 3/1, and for 1 mana, target creature gains haste until end of turn. And we've again seen cards like this in the past. Maybe limited playable, but probably not beyond that. Next, we've got Grow Extra Arms for 1 and a green mana. You get an instant, and this spell costs 1 less to cast if it targets a spider, and target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. If you're casting this for 1 mana, it's a very powerful spell because this is Giant Growth Plus for 1 mana. And under those circumstances, it's not only a good limited card, but it potentially has some standard playability. Next, we've got Guy in the Chair for 2 and a green mana. You get a Human Advisor. That's a 2/3. And you can tap him to add 1 mana of any color. And it also has web support for 2 and a green mana. You can tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on target spider you control, and you can activate that only as a sorcery. So probably just a limited card because we have better mana dorks with Lyanowar Elves in Standard right now. But, in those situations where you're looking for an additional mana source in limited, Guy's not a bad option. Next, we've got Kaplow for 2 and a green mana. You get a sorcery. First, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. It fights target creature an opponent controls. So our typical 3 mana removal spell in green for limited. Next, we've got Craven's Cats for 1 and a green mana. You get a cat villain, and they're 2/2. And for 2 and a green mana, this creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and you can only activate it once each turn. Limited playable, won't see play beyond that. And next we've got Lurking Lizards for 1 and a green mana. You get a lizard villain, 1/3 with trample, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on this. So probably a good limited card, but won't see standard play. But I am pleased to see that we're getting some lizard cards in the Marvel Spider-Man set, because right now we have a kind of tier 2 Rakdos lizard deck that is probably our best aggro deck right now in Standard after the bannings, and Lurking Lizards doesn't go in that deck, but it gives me hope that we'll see maybe a lizard or 2 that could fit into that deck. Next, we've got Scout the City for 1 and a green mana. We get a sorcery, and you can choose 1, look around, mill 3 cards. You may put a permanent card from among them into your hand, and you do gain 3 life. And you can also play it for Bring Down, destroy target creature with flying. So, interesting card here, where probably not standard playable, but we do have mill decks in Standard right now that wants to mill your own cards into the graveyard, and the ability to get a permanent card back from among those is not bad. So 2 mana, hopefully draw a card, gain 3 life. Okay, very reasonable in Standard. And its flexibility of being able to destroy a creature with flying, I think gives it some outside sideboard option kind of thing going on for Standard. Next, we've got Eerie Gravestone for 2 mana. You get an artifact. When the artifact enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. And then for 1 and a black, you can sacrifice this artifact, mill 4 cards. You may put a creature card from among them milled into your hand. Okay, limited playable. Probably won't see anything beyond that. And our last 2 cards of the day are Mechanical Mobster and Spider Bot. So Mechanical Mobster, 3 mana, human, robot, villain, 2/1. When this creature enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. And target creature you control connives. So decent limited card here. Probably won't see anything beyond that in terms of play. And our last card of the day is Spider Bot for 2 mana. You get an artifact creature that's a Spider Robot Scout, 2/1 with reach. And when this creature enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, then shuffle, put that card on top of your library. We've got similar cards to this already in Standard that are not seeing play. So potentially limited playable, but probably nothing beyond that. All right. Well, that's our adventure through our first look at Marvel Spider-Man, 50 plus cards that we saw from the set today. So, we're probably going to see around 280 total cards from the set. So we've got a pretty good look at what's in the set. I really like the fact that we've got the legendary commons in Marvel Spider-Man. And because of that, I think this is going to be an interesting set for people not only to collect, but play. So thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I will return with more Marvel Spider-Man previews as Marvel Spider-Man preview season begins. And don't forget, hey, Edge of Eternities is coming out on Friday, or coming out this week. So you can check out my list for what I feel are the best mythics, rares, and uncommons from the set, and I put a link here for that for you. Thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I will see you in the next one.